Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Welsh Athletics Stay Involved series during lockdown. It's great to see tracks and things opening up and activity starting once again for us all, and even some competitions starting here in Wales. In the speed world, we've got some pilot competitions coming in mid-August, and then hopefully, if they're successful, we'll be rolling out a few more subsequent competitions through late August and even into September. So as much as maybe we didn't think it at one point, we are now at the point where we're going to see a bit of an athletic season, however condensed and different it may look, but at least we're getting back on track and we are starting to see some performances, which is where we all want to be. Thank you for coming back this evening. Any of you guys who've come to my other webinars on the 400 and the ones around acceleration and max velocity. Today we will be talking around the 200 meters. So very much event specific, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. A few little housekeepings. If you have any technical questions, if you've got any issues, if you could put that in the chat box, someone will get back to you on that. And then if you've got any questions regarding the PowerPoint and the webinar, then if you put those in the questions box, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation tonight. I know that I've gone on a little bit in some of my other presentations. Any of you that know me know that I tend to go off on tangents and I end up kind of going all over the place. So I've tried to keep this one as concise as possible today, try and hit the presentation in around half an hour, so we have a good sort of 15 minutes for any questions and answers people may have at the end. So yeah, the presentation we shall get started with now. As I said, the introduction to the 200 meters. So there we go. For some reason the webcam didn't want to work then. There we go. So today around the webinar, we are always looking at sort of what learning objectives are we wanting to get out of this evening. Again, very similar. I've used a similar format that I used for the 400 one, and I had some good feedback on for this. So basically, we want to get a greater understanding of the 200 meter event. We're going to look at the technical aspects, so how you break the 200 meters down into its component parts and then put that together for the event itself. We're going to look at classifying those training zones again, and then also we'll have a little bit of a delve into appropriate training sessions and volumes for any developing athletes you work with. Now, one of the questions I had on the 400 meter webinar was around developing athletes, age brackets and things. When I talk around developing athletes and I'm talking event specific, I'm talking more 15 up to 20 years of age, in that kind of age bracket. Some of the younger ones, then it's more that multi-event approach, as opposed to really getting down into the detail. So we're looking at more 15 and up, that kind of age bracket. Even a lot of this stuff is appropriate for the senior athletes as well. Okay then. 200 meters. What is the 200 meters? We are in a place at the moment where we're sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of my webcam. I can't. There we go. The 200 meters. 200 meters. Sorry about that, guys. 200 meters as an event is a max. Again, with the 400 is this. I like to think of the 200, it's just slightly sub-max. If you've ever run one yourself or with your athletes, if you try and go 100% gun to tape, you're gonna have a bad day. Like it's not going to be the best way to run. So it is literally just a fraction off max. But for elite men, we're looking at sort of 19 to 20 seconds, and then elite women 20 to 21. You can see their current world record holders, Usain Bolt, Florence Griffiths Joyner, 19:19 and 21:34. They're just times are just absolutely astronomical. And then current British records, the British legend that is John Regis, 1994. John actually ran, for any of the statos out there, he did run a faster time, but it was at altitude of 19.87. And then Dino Asher-Smith, current world champion, 21.88, British record in Doha last year. Absolutely fantastic running. Closer to home here in Wales, Welsh records, the Welsh sprint legend and a very good friend of mine, Mr. Christian Malcolm, set the Welsh record in 2001 in Edmonton, 20.08, and I believe that was finishing 4th at the World, it may have been 5th, it was a blanket finish in the World Championships back in 2001. And then same as the 400-meter record holder, Michelle Scutt, 22.80 back in 1982. So some very, very good running back in those days. And then also some impressive Welsh junior records. Christian Malcolm as well, 20.29. In the picture we can see in front of us there at Kuala Lumpur, where actually I was his roommate, so I'm going to take credit for that one. And then 2015, the little Miss Hannah Breyer, the turnover queen, 23.59, and she was probably only about 5'1" when she ran that. So some pretty impressive running. And then also, if you have any aspirations for going on to represent Wales at Commonwealth Games or coaching athletes, these are the performance levels you need to be looking at, as everything is kind of within the Commonwealth Games now is looking at a top 6 finish. So on the men's side of things, if you're wanting to represent Wales at the Commonwealth Games, 20.65, and then the women's side, you're looking at 23.25. That's going to be around the performance markers you need to be hitting to be getting a standard for the Commonwealth Games. So those aspirations need to be really up there. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit of the event breakdown and the components that it's kind of looking at. Now, again, a little bit of feedback I got from the last webinar. A few people like the visual representation of the race breakdown of the 400. So I've tried to do something similar for the 200. It's not quite as fancy. I did this myself using clip art, something like that. Anyway, so if we look at the picture here, you can see the 200-meter race breakdown, 200-meter start line, staggered start over here. And the first phase, I haven't, you'll notice here, I haven't put specific distances on these because it's very different for each athlete, however their maturation is, age, performance level, and so on and so forth. If you've got a very high level, high skilled athlete, probably their acceleration phase is going to be slightly longer. If you're working with a developing athlete, young athlete, their acceleration phase is probably going to be slightly shorter. But again, it's kind of just to give you a bit of an idea of a general race model and how to break it down in communicating with the athlete. So first, anywhere between 25 and 40 meters is the start and acceleration phase. And it's the same principles as if you were accelerating in 100 meters. It's just slightly more controlled. There's just probably 0.5% taken off in terms of out and out input, just to get a little bit of a smoother acceleration. And then with that, you probably take that out a little bit longer as well on the bend. We then come into a speed maintenance phase, and that can be sort of anywhere between 40, 50, 60 meters, again, depending on the type of athlete you're working with. Now, speed maintenance on a bend is key. If you don't actually relax at some point during this mid portion of the bend and you keep the foot hard down on the accelerator the whole way, you are going to pay for it in the last 30, 40 meters of the race. So this is one of the key components to running a very, very good 200 meters. If you can maximize this speed maintenance phase from sort of 40 to 80 meters of the race, where you're operating just slightly sub-maximally, but with a good level of relaxation, then you're going to have a little bit more energy come that last quarter of the race. So this is something to work on in training, and this is something that we'll chat about later in some of the training phases as to how to work on that. And then again, probably if you speak to a lot of coaches, the most important part of a 200-meter phase is where we come down into the red zone, this transition. This is that kind of 50-meter zone where it's the last 20 to 25 meters of the bend and then the first 20 to 25 meters of the straight. If you get the feeling of this transition right, it's a really good feeling, and you actually feel like you accelerate off the bend. You should feel like your hips and everything almost feel like they lift as you come off. But if you get this part correct in a 200, then you're going to probably run a pretty fast time, because that will set you up for the final phase. So we've got those first three phases there: the starting, the acceleration, the speed maintenance, and then this transition. These are all skills that can be worked on, and we will talk about that in a little bit. And then the final phase, you could break this down into two phases. I've simplified it into one, where it's about the last 60, 70 meters of the race, and we're purely into this speed endurance. And I like to put technique there, because I think your max velocity technique in 200 meters is actually slightly more important than in the 100. The 100, you can see athletes muscling to get through. They can get away with running with some poor mechanics sometimes. In a 200 meters, if you've got poor mechanics, you will get found out in the last 50 meters of a race. So you seriously need to work on that technique, that max velocity sprinting, so you can actually hold this last 60 meters. The speed endurance and that technique will hold up under pressure. Because if you've overcooked any of these first phases, then again, this last sort of 50 won't feel too far off the last 50 of a 400 if you get it wrong. And if you get all of these phases right, then you will be running a very good 200. Now, I've got these lines in differentiating. For the best 200 meter runners, this is all a blend. It's not one phase into the next phase into the next phase. They'll blend their acceleration into a really nice speed maintenance phase, and they'll blend that speed maintenance phase into their transition, and then transition then also just blends into a lovely technical model coming off the bend. So you almost want to try and think of this as a nice fluid run where all of these phases complement the one before and blend off the one before. It's not one phase into a next into a next. So it's easy to visualize it like this, but try and think about all of those blending in, and also make sure you model those to the athlete you're working with. A race breakdown for a 15-year-old girl is not going to look the same as a race breakdown for a 22-year-old guy who's running 20.3 seconds or 21.3 even. Their models should look a little bit different. So always have a think about that. When we look at the technical components now, so if we come back from that race breakdown and look at the technical components, the first one is being able to accelerate and clear your blocks on a bend. That's a skill that you have to practice. It's not something you can do a lot of acceleration in a straight line, but the best 200 meter runners, they've learned the ability to accelerate on a bend. And it is a slight skill to it, is a different skill set to running in a straight line. Bend running is also a big skill. Some of the best 200 meter runners in the world are amazing at bend running. Probably one that stands out for me historically, never run the fastest times, but would always be there when it mattered at a championship, was Darren Campbell. And Darren Campbell's ability to run a bend was absolutely phenomenal. We'll get into some of the technical components as to what makes a good bend runner or what we're looking at for a bend runner. But again, it's a skill that needs to be looked at. Maintain speed under relaxation, key to 200 meter running. You can't be operating on that red line the whole time. You've got to be able to relax, but also maintain that speed. As I alluded to on the one before, those max velocity mechanics are vitally important. If you look at historically all of the best 200 meter runners, and that could be in Wales, in Britain, at age groups, all of them have got very good running mechanics. Their sprinting mechanics are pretty sound, because you just can't afford any wastage of energy. And then another one is speed endurance. You have to have very, very good levels of speed endurance if you are to be a very good 200-meter runner. So let's get into a little bit of some of the breakdowns on that. So now we're looking at setting up the blocks on a 200 meters. And this is something quite specific here. If we want to look at actually setting up the blocks. I see a lot of issues with some of the younger athletes setting up blocks. So the first things the two things you really want to look at, that the blocks are slightly offset from the center. So if that's the center of the line, the blocks are slightly offset. They're not all the way out on the outside, they're just slightly offset. And then for me, the easiest way to visualize or cue an athlete as to how to set the blocks up is to angle the block plate, so the middle bit of metal, towards the edge of the relay box in your lane. So every time you run a 200 meters, there'll be a relay changeover zone 10 meters in front of you. Now, if you get this block plate directly angled at the edge of that, what that will allow the athlete to do is, as they come out of the blocks, for that first 10 meters, they can actually run in a straight line. Now, the best way to accelerate is in a straight line. So the best way to set the blocks up to allow that athlete for the first sort of probably 4, 5, 6 steps, depending on who you're working with, they'll actually be able to accelerate in a relatively straight line. So always look at this block plate and just try and angle that towards the outside here. The don'ts that we have, as I said earlier, are that the blocks are way too far onto the outside of the lane and they're too steeply angled. So just to give you a little bit of a, oh, sorry, there you go. So you can see here along, I forgot I had that red arrow there. So you can see there where the block plate is angled, you've got that nice, smooth, long, straight run out for that first bend. And these bends here are pretty tight. So you can still see, if you angle it correctly, you can get a nice straight projection out for those first few steps. What we don't want to see, if you look at this picture here over on the left, is a block plate that's too far out to the side of the lane and it's angled too steeply into the inside of the bend. So if you look at that block plate, that's going to push the angle of the bend right in, and that is not what we want to see. So block plates is the setup. When we now talk about bend running, that's another skill that we were looking at. When you are working with your athletes and cueing your athletes, one of the cues that you should give them is the inside shoulder. So that'll be their left shoulder should be actively leant inwards towards the inside of the bend. And even ever so fractionally, you could actually have a slight forward lean as well. But be careful with that one, because you can get some younger athletes over rotating, leaning too far forward. So if you just get them to think about that inside shoulder just slightly leaning in towards the bend, and then almost counterintuitively, the hips should be slightly pressed towards the outside. So the shoulder leads in and the hips press slightly out. And that will allow you to maintain a nice angle going around the bend. And also, whilst you're going around the bend, you should slightly shorten the arm carriage. You don't want to be running with big open arm movements. You slightly shorten the arm carriage, because that will help increase the frequency a little bit around the bend. And then once we start talking about the transition, as the transition happens and the athlete comes from the bend onto the straight, the hips and the shoulders should gradually square up. So the hips come under the athlete and the shoulders stack up on top. And if the athletes do that correctly, then they should feel like they lift as they come off the bend. And then as they're coming into the straight, that arm carriage and that stride pattern should naturally lengthen. If the hips slightly lift a little bit and the shoulders come square, they don't actively need to feel like they're opening. As a result of those things, the arm carriage and the stride length will open a little bit. I've got a video here. I'll play it through a couple of times. I'm hopeful that it'll work. It may not do. We did try uploading them, I'll just let this. So you can see the athlete there. They've opened up into a nice posture off the bend. I'll let this run through again, but you can see the inside shoulder leaning into the bend and then straightening up as they come off. Again here, inside shoulder leaning into the bend. Now, when I do this drill, I just put the cones down as a visual cue. They're slightly offset towards the outside of the lane, but this just gives a visual cue to the athlete of what kind of arc they should be running as they come off the bend. It's not a case of being right to the outside of the bend and then straightening up into the middle. It's just slightly offset and then it'd be centralized as they come off the bend into that transition. So checkpoints, inside shoulder lent in, hips slightly pressed out, slightly shorter arm carriage, which will help increase frequency on a bend, and then everything squaring up through the transition, and they get that feeling of lift. And then the result should be that the arm carriage and the stride pattern naturally slightly lengthen. So that would be some bend running and off bend transition. And again, these are skills that can be worked on that we'll go into when we look at some of the session plans. Max velocity posture and speed maintenance. For me, this is something I looked at when we were talking about max velocity. The best drill, I think, to improve an athlete's posture, which will improve an athlete's ability to maintain speed. It'll improve an athlete's ability to relax whilst running at speed. And it's a highly complex skill once they can utilize it, for me, is mechanics. So it improves your upright posture. It minimizes excessive front side and rear mechanics, as I said. So, and the one thing with wickets that we don't see a lot of, actually they can be done on a bend. I would do this only once an athlete has sort of really got to grips with doing it in a straight line. Once they've done it in a straight line, challenge the athlete, do it on the middle portion of the bend, see if they can run over the wicket. This will really help them with that speed maintenance phase on the middle part of the bend. And then also, if ever you're doing speed endurance runs or longer runs and you want to work on an athlete's postural control and their sort of speed maintenance under fatigue, try putting some wickets in later on into a rep, so they're having to work on their mechanics under that little bit of fatigue. Or you can do long wicket runs. I've seen wicket runs done over 90 to 100 meters. So if you're doing multiple reps, then you're starting to work some skills under fatigue there. So for me, the biggest ability to improve max velocity posture would be a wicket drill. We can see an athlete here there. The wicket makes the athlete step down vertically, stops excessive front side or rear side mechanics where they're reaching too far in front of themselves. You can see the athlete running over the wicket. As I said, you can do this on a bend. You could potentially do this at the end of some longer reps, or have some longer reps going over the wicket to develop the skills that you're looking for. Okay, let's get into some of the specific training zones around the 200 meters. Very, very similar. Well, before we get into the specific zones, again, we should touch on this. Something I spoke about on the 400 meter webinar a few weeks ago. When you're working with developing athletes, always make sure you kind of go back to the youth physical development model, Lloyd and Oliver from 2012, and make sure the work that you're doing is appropriate for the type of athlete that you are working with. So for all sprinters in these sort of 15 upward, the agility, speed, power, strength are all the majority of the skills we want to be looking at. Again, endurance qualities, speed endurance qualities, all of those things and training loads are things we can put on at later ages, but speed, power, agility are all the things we want to be working on that 15 to 20 category. Okay, training zones. So again, very similar to when we talked with the 400 and also within short sprints as well. First one for me would be acceleration. Always vitally important in 200-meter running. Anything up to 40 meters in reps. Accumulate distance of 120 to 250. And again, with acceleration, we want to be working this all year round. If you're coaching 200-meter runners, you need to be working acceleration all year round now. And the big key element to this, we see a lot of sprinters doing sprint starts in a straight line and competitive in a straight line. We should see a lot of athletes doing these starts on a bend as well. Practicing and starting on a bend is a skill within itself. The more an athlete does that, the more confident they will be at setting the blocks up. If you're not there as their coach on the day, they'll be a lot more confident in how to set the blocks up to get that correct angle. Next training zone, very simply speed, and this is pure speed. So we're looking at anything from 50 to 90 meters in like a rep distance. And again, if we're looking at pure speed, it has to be above 90%, 97% of that max velocity. If you're working below that, you're not really working on that pure speed. If we're looking at, again, pure speed, anywhere between 200, 400 meters of speed work is a lot. That would be a quite highly physically developed athlete. 400 meters there, you'd be looking at 4 times 90 at 98, 90% of max velocity. If you're working with a 23-second female sprinter or a 21 second 200-meter sprinter, that's gonna have pretty high fatigue levels on their nervous system. So always be aware of the potential knock-on effect of the total volumes. Specific speed endurance would be one of the next training zones we're looking at. Again, sort of 90 meters to 100 meters, 150 meters. If we're looking at pure speed endurance, if you're starting to do reps of 200s, 220s, 250s, you're going outside speed endurance then, and you're looking more into specific endurance. So if you're looking to develop the speed endurance qualities, reps between 90 meters and 150 meters. And then your accumulate distance for those total sessions is anywhere between 300 and 500 meters. So something around 4 times 150, 5 times 120, 4 times 120. Anything around that kind of distance, accumulation is a good level of speed endurance. But again, if it's speed endurance, it needs to be up over 95% of that max velocity to be really working on those speed endurance qualities. Specific endurance, as I just said there, if you start to get now out between 150 up to 250, maybe 300 meters, probably then you're into the realms of specific endurance. But again, if we're working on specific endurance, it needs to be upwards around 95% or higher of your race speed, because otherwise we're not hitting that specific endurance. It's more special endurance or anaerobic endurance then. So with a session of this nature, we'd be looking at 400 to 600. And another way of looking at specific endurance is looking at maybe 2 to 3 times total race distance. So if you're a 200-meter runner, anywhere between 400 and 600 is 2 to 3 times race distance. So you could do something in the nature on that there, where you're looking at multiple 220s, 3 220s, or split runs. I think for me, a big underutilized tool for specific endurance in 200-meter running, it's used a lot in 400-meter running, is split runs. You can do split 200s, split 220s, anything of that nature to work on some real specific endurance. Again, if we've got a special endurance, then we're starting to look slightly longer in terms of reps, but now special endurance, you can see that the percentage of the race speed drops anywhere between 70% and 95%. We're starting to work special endurance. So now that the speed drops, we can slightly increase the accumulate distance. So between 600 and 1,000 meters. And again, all of these distances are very much with athlete focus in terms of maturation and age. And again, special endurance is something that is focused on it can be that fitness work through the winter to give an athlete the feeling that they're fit, or if you've got athletes who are operating, potentially doing 2 to 3 races on one day, then a little bit of special endurance work to increase that capacity to recover after races could be advisable. And then a standalone one for myself is the technical development side of things. I think you need to have sessions as a coach that work on those technical skills. So again, 30 meters to 120 meters in reps, but it needs to be a skill-based focus. So you're doing some wicket runs, block starts, wickets on a bend, end bend and off bend runs. There has to be that real big technical focus to the work that you're doing. Okay, so we get into some example sessions now. So if we look at this box here on the left-hand side, so for me, the classification, as with 400-meter training, you can pair training zones together. So for this session here, I've got a technical development component with a special endurance session. So we'd have 4 times 50-meter wicket runs, to where the athlete would be running, picking up a wicket after 15 to 20 meters, and then running over 30 meters of wickets at a set distance apart, where we're trying to develop that improved postural control and relaxation at speed. And then I'd couple that potentially with a special endurance session. So we'd have 4 to 6 150s, all at about 80% of race distance. So if you start hitting your first couple of 150s and you're within 5% of your race speed, you're not then going to be hitting special endurance, and you're probably going to end up with athletes that maybe does 3 reps and is throwing up everywhere. So again, always work on specific percentages of where you want to be in terms of the speeds that you're running. So if we come over to another session here on the right-hand side, again, 2 focuses, acceleration and speed endurance. So again, acceleration specific to 200 meters. The athlete would do potentially 4, maybe 5 block starts on the bend. So 20 meters from the 200-meter start, and always get the athlete to set their own blocks up. You can give them pointers and really get clarity around what they're trying to do on those block starts. And then I couple that potentially with a speed endurance session, something like 3 120s, but these need to be operated upwards towards 95 to 98% of that max velocity, but then also 12 minutes recovery, 12 to 15, to make sure you're getting adequate recovery in that. Speed endurance is quite fatiguing. So if you've got an athlete and they've done 2 very high quality reps and some good block starts before it, I'd be more than happy to call the session there. You're always better to do slightly too little than to do too much. Just because if you've written 3 reps down on the sheet, but the athlete's pretty tired after 2, never be afraid to walk away before that. I've actually seen an athlete doing their last session before an Olympic Games where they had 4 reps written down. They did 3 reps, all at PB pace, and then on the 4th rep tore their hamstring. Once they'd done those 3 reps, they should have shut it down there, gone into the Games Village, and probably won a medal. And they did end up winning the medal in a relay, but the athlete probably could have won an individual medal. So as a coach, always err on the side of doing slightly too little than slightly too much. If we go back to some different example sessions here, technical development session. So for me, this is a standalone technical development session. So I've got 4 times wicket runs, and this is mid-bend. So this is a highly skilled athlete doing 4 60-meter wicket runs on a bend. You could do these on a straight and get the athlete to learn how to do these. And then I've coupled that with 3 to 4 100 meters, where it's a 50-meter bend and a 50-meter straight. So we're working that transition off the bend into the straight. Let the athlete develop the skills of how to lean their shoulder into the bend and get that feeling of lifting off of it. Oh, sorry. And then the next session we've got over here on the right-hand side, again, coupling acceleration and specific endurance. So again, I'm a fan of resistance sled work. You can do this with a band, some 30-meter reps, however you want to do those. And then, as I said earlier, I think split runs are undervalued in 200-meter training. So you can see here I've got 1 to 2, pardon me, split 230s. I've done the maths wrong there, so that should say 1 times 120 and 1 times 110, but they need to be at 200-meter race pace. So you would do 120 meters from the 200-meter start line at race pace. The athlete would then have 45 seconds recovery. In that time, they have to walk back to the 110-meter start line, and then they hit a rolling 100. So you can time then the rolling 100, add that to the time that they've run. So with that 120, you stop the clock when they hit the cone at the 100-meter point. You accumulate those times together, and it should give you a pretty accurate accumulation time of what an athlete may be capable of for 200, especially if they could maybe do 2 reps within a few tenths of a second. So it'd be 120 meters from the 200-meter start, then a rolling 110. I don't feel like I explained that well. If anyone's got any questions on that, I can explain it a little bit better. And then the final 2 examples, again, we've got another special endurance and acceleration, working on different skill sets, working tripod starts. Again, you could do a tripod start on a bend. Ask an athlete to try and do tripod starts off both legs on a bend, because that could help them with relay running. So we've got 2 20 meters and 2 30-meter tripod starts, and then something more special endurance focused, 6 to 8 200-meter reps, but they're all at 70%. So they're all at much lower intensity, relatively short recovery, and we're just working on some work capacity for the athlete there. These are just to develop some work capacity skills. Again, we don't want to be seeing athletes throwing up at the end of it. As long as they're working in this 70% bracket, then that's going to be good to increase that capacity. And then again, similar to something I did on the max velocity one, we've got a pure speed and a power development. So 360s and 390s. That's the maximum probably volume of speed work I would do with a 200-meter runner. We'd probably actually start with 2 of each, and then I'd go into a series of overhead throws and some standing long jump. So we're working on those power developments. Coaching tips that I would sort of highlight when you're delivering sessions for that 200-meter runner. Always think about the specific skills of the event. 200-meter running is a skill, and you can work on those bend runnings, accelerating on a bend, off the bend, maintenance under speed. Always have a clear session of your, a clear idea of your session. What do you want to get out of it at the start? Make sure the athlete knows what you're trying to get out of the session, and they'll buy into it as well. Always research the event demands. 200-meter running is not just as fast as you can from gun to tape. You've got to learn how to run a 200. We see it a lot with developing athletes. They just try and go eyeballs out from the start, and then the last 50 they're just hanging and see a lot of rear side mechanics or a lot of reaching and clawing. So then when you're working on setting up your training sessions, don't be afraid to pair training zones. And then again, the last one, speed beats fitness. The speed quality will beat a fitness quality all day long. So always come at things from a speed first perspective. And that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice. Okay, I feel like I've rattled through that. I look at my clock and I've gone over a little bit. It's a little bit better than it has been the last couple, but we will get into the Q&A session now. I think I'm about 40 minutes in there, which for me is quite good because I normally don't stop talking until 8 o'clock. So I will try and open the question box now. If anyone has got any questions, please feel free to add them into the questions box now as we go. I'm not sure if there is any questions. Okay, I'll give if anybody has got a question, if you'd like to now, I did try and rattle through that a little bit. Okay, we've got a question from Robbie here. How long is our warm up for athletes before our sessions? I think this is very, very tailored to the type of athlete you're working with. My warm up for, if I was running a session with a group of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, even maybe an under 15 potentially, I would look at probably only 25 minutes. I would look at 10 minutes of a bit of dynamic mobility, activation type work, some walking drills and some kind of postural control drills, and then into some sort of running drills, and then some fast running or some block starts. 25 to 30 minutes for a young athlete would be fine. If you're starting to work with 18, 19, 20-year-olds and up, probably something more like 30 to 45 minutes, where you're actually getting a bit more dynamic and specific mobility in there, and then a few more sort of A skip, B skip type activities into running series drills, dribble series, fast leg, all those kind of things. So for me, it would be probably below 18, anything up to half an hour, 18 up to 20, we're probably looking at more like 30 to 45 minutes. And then once you start getting into some of the older age groups, then we're probably looking more like 45 minutes to an hour potentially. With the athletes I work with, we have quite an extensive warm-up and we're looking at around about an hour. Okay. From Joe Jones, do you have an ideal differential between 100? Personally, I don't. I think it's very, very skill orientated. You get some very good 100-meter runners that, whether they haven't got the fitness qualities or the components required to run that 200, or the ability to run at speed with the relaxation, but I haven't got a differential. It's not quite as simple as maybe with the 400, where you can potentially go timesing your 200-meter time by 2 and add in 2 seconds, or however you want to look at it. So sorry, no, I don't personally. A question from, I need to open this a little bit bigger. From Helen, Robbie, will I be doing a talk around 100 meters? If there's a request for it, I can definitely do a talk specifically around the 100 meters. That can be arranged, no problem at all. What session from Gillian Sykes? What and when would be your last session before a race? Again, very different for a developing athlete as opposed to a high-level athlete. For a developing athlete, if your normal training days are Monday, Thursday, and then you compete on a Saturday, doing a session on a Thursday with a developing athlete would be fine. In that session, I'd probably look at doing some block starts. I'd keep it maybe acceleration focused. I wouldn't necessarily do any max velocity, real pure speed work on that session, but I might do some block starts, and I may do 1 or 2 off the bend runs, and that would be on the Thursday before. You could potentially do some intensive tempo type work if you wanted to, a couple of 3 or 4 120s. Very much depends on the type of athlete you're working with. But again, if it was a Thursday and they were racing on a Saturday for a junior athlete, that would be fine. With a higher level performing athlete, I would actually do what we call sort of a pre-meet or a pre-comp session the day before the competition, where they do a full warm-up and they may do a couple of block starts just to get the neural system firing, ready to compete the next day. So again, it's a little bit different, but developing athletes, yeah, a day or 2 days prior to a competition would be fine to be able to do some block starts and some technical off the bend runs. We've got a couple more questions. One question here, no name on the asker, but how do you get your percentages of the work? You take your 200-meter target or your 200-meter PB? That's a very good question, actually. Something I probably haven't explained very well is I do a lot of work off percentages. But yeah, I utilize the athlete's personal best and then equate it down. So I would just, whatever their 200-meter PB is, equate it out into percentages so that we can operate quite easily then. So we know if they're doing a 150 at 80%, if they're 100, if their max out 150 is, say for one of the faster people I work with, they're 15.2. Now to extrapolate that down to work at 80%, I can just say, right, these need to be 16.5 to 16.8. And if we're working in that 16.5 to 16.8 bracket, I know we're in the 80% bracket. If that time starts creeping down into 15.8, 15.7, then, or even 16 low, they're not working in the zone I want them to be working in. So whatever your athlete's personal best is and the fastest they can run, you can work your percentages off of that. And it's key, because if that's the idea for your session and the athlete is, you want them working at 80%, but they're actually working up at 90-95%, they're going to be working more towards speed endurance, and fatigue levels are going to be too high for what you want them doing. So especially in the winter, if you want to work on special endurance or kind of just building that fitness work, you've always got to make sure they're operating in a percentage that you want them to be working in. Question here from Wendy Slade. Can you go through the wicket spacings? I've got some documentation on that on a different presentation, Wendy, which I can send over to you for quick kind of, again, wicket spacing is very dependent on the athlete you're working with. A 15-year-old developing female who's 5'2" is going to have very different spaces, even potentially from a 15-16-year-old boy who's shot up and is 6'1". So I would always make sure that the spacings for me are ideally suited to the athlete I'm working with. Female spacings, depending on age, can be anywhere from 1.50 to 2 meters. Depending on their height and all sorts. And for male athletes, could be anywhere between 2 meters. Well, even for some of the younger frequency-orientated younger males, you'd be looking at 1.80 meters up to 2.20 meters. And then if they're high-level athletes, 2.30 meters, 30 and up from there. But yeah, I've got some stuff that I'll probably be able to send through to you on that, Wendy. From Helen, are there any coaches in South Wales that will do some private sessions to help an under 15? Probably your best bet, Helen, is, I'm not sure what club if you're a member of a club, but it would be contacting your local club, finding out who the local coaches are there, and those coaches will be more than happy to put on some specific sessions for that. Yeah, first year under 15. Again, within that, it's if you're in the South Wales area, there's Newport, Rhondda, Aberdare, Cardiff, Bridgend, lots and lots of local clubs that will all do sessions for under 15s. So what your local one is, I'm sure can help you with that. Okay. I think that's through all of the questions I can see here. Best coaching, sorry, from Helen. Best coaching book on your bookshelf. That's an interesting one. One I probably love at the moment is, and it's not necessarily specific to do with sprinting, but it's very much around the world of strength and conditioning and S&C developing for developing athletes. And it's Kelvin Giles's physical literacy book. And for me, in terms of classification of movement patterns, functional movement, and it breaks movement patterns and how to squat, lunge, hinge for developing athletes and what coaches should be looking for. The world of S&C is a very scary place, and I think it simplifies it very well to know what you're looking for on certain exercises. So in terms of that, that's one thing I love at the moment in terms of that side of things. Actual coaching books, I'll get back to you on that. My mind's gone blank at the moment for some reason. I've got a good old school one from the 70s, which is just track and field coaching. And I think some of the stuff that went on in the 70s and the information books that they had in the 70s were absolutely fantastic. So if I get your email at the end of this, Helen, which I will send over the link to the track and field coaching book from the 70s. It was either 70s or 80s, but it's fantastic. Okay, well, I can't see any more questions there. I hope I have answered. Oh, hold on, we do have a couple more. Is this being recorded? I missed the 400 one, and this is awesome. Thank you for saying it's awesome. I appreciate that. Yes, it's being recorded. It will be put up on the website. It will be being put up on the YouTube. Sorry. Okay, we do have another one. I'm not sure who this is from. With more developed athletes, how much do you feel you need to maintain the fitness, intensive tempo work to feed specific endurance qualities? Good question. With a more developed athlete, probably they will respond a little bit more to some of the intensive tempo type work, because the more developed athlete you get, if you're working pure speed, they're going to need quite long levels of recovery, and you can actually use some of the endurance work to aid recovery. So if you've got a high speed session, I potentially then would follow that up with a couple of just fitness sessions to help flush the system through and try and recover from that pure speed exposure. Probably for the less developed athlete and for younger athletes, I would look more working on skill-based work and the technical qualities to improve through the winter as well. One thing you find with some of the developed athletes, they like to feel fit, especially if they've got potentially 2 or 3 rounds. So some of those special endurance sessions, they like to do a few of those because they feel like they're very fit going into some of the high level competitions, let's say, where they may have 3 races in a day. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think I've been through most of those questions. If you've got any other questions subsequently that you want to send through to me, my email is on the screen, matt.elias@welshathletics.org. I always put my phone number up there as well. Feel free to drop me a message. I like to help coaches develop, so if you've got any mentoring needs, or even if it's just ideas around sessions, you can email me or message me there, no problem at all. So thank you very much for tuning in. Feel free to send us any feedback. There will be a questionnaire being sent out directly after this. Please spend a couple of minutes just giving us some feedback. This will help guide us. We are now looking at rolling out this webinar series potentially for the next 18 months. We've had some good feedback during lockdown of people engaging with it. So we're going to look at rolling this out and possibly operating another 8 to 10 of these webinars over the next 12 to 18 months. So any feedback or questions you may have on these, that we may look at doing one on sprint hurdles, potentially 4 hurdles, strength and conditioning, annual planning, anything you may want to learn about, then let us know. We're also going to look at getting some international speakers in, because I know you're all bored of looking at my face and listening to my voice now. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy your evening, and stay safe during lockdown.